from the smallest to major corporate transitions. So I'm also offering to share the slide deck. I have forwarded that to Anders, and he can make that available to all of the attendees. And I encourage and welcome people to please send me emails. As Anders said, you're welcome to interrupt, send him questions, and when he says, yeah, let's just have a sidebar where we have a bit to chat and share ideas, I do want other people to be able to chime in with audio, using your, whether it's by phone or the computer audio video. So with that, a lot of you know me, and it's a little embarrassing to actually say that the first program that I designed was in 1979, outsourcing the accounts receivable for a small corporation, and they had two stores. And then when I typed outsourcing, I went, oh my Lord, did I really do that as well? That's almost a dirty thing now, but it was definitely a financial benefit for us back then, and you go where the skills are. As consultants, we're very fortunate that companies outsource their technical needs to us. Then again, the next one was actually creating a massive accounting system for a 3-state corporation. And that was because they didn't have an in-home in-home accounting system, and I just couldn't fathom relying on their accountants for everything, including doing their IRS filings. So, as a pipsqueak putting myself through college. Go ahead, Anders.
That wasn't me saying anything. That was Giorgio just connecting his...
Okay. Sorry. Anyhow, so that's a little background on me. My real grounding in project management came when I was working for the U.S. Department of Energy at Hanford and managing $200 million projects with annual, our annual expenses were about that, and capital was just beyond state-of-the-art, and negotiating with defense organizations and the state environmental EPA and the tribes. So I got hit from every way you can, and how to bring up 5 different contractors working on a project, all battling, fighting for turf and domain. But if we didn't all share a goal, nothing would happen. So that was my introduction in my 20s to project management, and I felt that I benefited for my own skills and the United States. So anyway, that brings us around to where we all are. And every day, whatever we're managing in our projects, we are responsible for figuring out, being some genius with a crystal ball, what are the requirements and what's going to happen in the future, and how do we make everything work when we don't have control over hardware or all of the integrating software or what's coming down the pike. So with that, we're still expected to meet schedules and costs, and it just keeps getting more and more complicated. So somehow having the skill set to use our technical expertise and manage projects, we have to combine those to be successful. I am incredibly fortunate to get to hire developers to work with me, and that's been one of my ways of managing costs and meeting schedules. So, as I mentioned, we have to bring all of this phenomenal, mind-boggling skill set to the table. And we're one person, and it's like I said, this crystal ball. How do we divine, detect, and anticipate, and then solve, provide a solution that meets our clients' needs today, tomorrow, and can be expanded and enhanced for years to come. So hopefully we will figure that out. So my goal is that from this session, and I'm going through these slides rather rapidly, I'm expecting that we'll pretty soon get, as soon as we get into some of the techniques, that we'll have other people chiming in. But the benefit is good project management skills can be applied to any platform and technology. And part of today's session is to hear how other people are mastering and meeting certain challenges, and then figure out how we can incorporate and adopt those techniques when applicable to our own project. This is definitely not a one-size-fits-all. So some of the very specific things is the technique for success, turning conflicts into partnerships, because it's schedule, feature, cost. Okay, those three things are all fighting for supremacy, or it's one department or another. Are you going to provide the functionality that one group wants or a different group? Are you going to meet management, overall reporting, and big picture goals? And at the same time, you have to drill into the details, such as on a manufacturing floor, and it just gets drilling further and further and further in, how much detail do you need? And we're going to, in dealing with project management, we have to not only look at our client, we really have to look at ourselves. And if we could only have that little camera, now that we actually can, discreetly be taping ourselves when we're in a discussion, when we're in a meeting, and then learn. Don't do it to investigate them or to spy on them. Do it to develop some insights into what we do. Because I swear, there's things, how people interpret my reaction or my facial expression to be totally the opposite of what I'm thinking I'm conveying. So how do we get insight into our own actions, tone of voice, and then school our responses to better serve our clients? And then by sharing our experiences, we will be furthering our networking and our connections. So those are just some of the things that we will be gaining today. Our focus is basically looking at our success stories. What do we package together when we are successful with our project management skills? We'll look at the big picture. How do we interact with the client? How do we understand the client needs? Then we'll look at some very specific project management techniques, and we'll look at some communication skills. Discuss. I'm using those interchangeably a little bit. So the big picture to one of the best tools we have with project management is to understand and stay focused on the big picture. And that's where we are all trying to understand what the business goals. And if we need to take a breath, step back and think about how we're working as a team. Remember you recall I mentioned that when I worked for the government, one of the challenges was these kind of adversarial situations, very adversarial situations, where 5 contractors have to work together on a project, but they basically feel like they're competing for funds and turf and control and supremacy, but we have to meet the state requirements, we have to meet EPA requirements, we have to meet Department of Defense requirements, we have to satisfy Congress, and we had to meet with the tribes, the Indian tribes, because we were tri-party agreement participants. And let's see, and my own agency, the Department of Energy. So how could I get everyone working to accomplish something? If anybody stepped out of the program, basically you've got to stop work. So by keeping people focused on our goals, think about the big picture. When we're talking about our own projects, database development, one of the things that we have to think about is our client's return on investment. My business ethic is I'm in it for them. I feel that I am their partner, and I have to operate as in a manner that gives them the best value. That doesn't mean the cheapest. It's benefits versus cost. And do we do it? How do we provide a solution that works well for them? So I try to understand from management level, and you guys can't see my hands moving up here so that I'm doing the hierarchy. But anyway, I look at management, and I work right on down to whatever the user or the recipient of the reports, the person entering data, the person who has to send it to a third party, whatever. So I try to look at the benefits and the costs. That's basic to any type of project management. How do we provide benefits? We increase efficiency. We provide reliability and performance. With access, data management, well, and with a lot of other areas, if you're reducing errors, whether that's rework or whatever, errors and downtime. Data integrity is huge. Oh my Lord. If people are entering data and they don't know whether they're accurate, or if they've deleted existing data, or can they or can't they recover, if all of that. When I'm talking about reliability and performance, I'm not really talking about network. I'm focused on my program, my project. where I have an impact. IT, bless them, please. Let me treat the network as a black box. Please let me have computers. My clients have computers and support they need. That's I really focus on and hope to separate the two where I'm not responsible for IT. So, Anders, chime in. Let me know if there's any kind of discussions or anything, questions coming up.
Oh, we don't have any questions yet. I do have a comment to add. If you could go back just a slide. I think when you say start with business goals, I just wanted to add that from my point of view, my experience has been I have to do 2 sales. I have to do 1 sale to the project owner or the management team, and they're focused on the business goals. But in order to have a successful project, I have to focus on the user's goals. How do I make his day easier? Because it's nice to have a program that the management loves, but if the user doesn't adopt it, if the user starts to make his own Excel sheets or keep his own lists, doing it outside the program, then I've lost the battle. I need to have the user want to use my program. And I do that by focusing on the user. I do that much more than focusing on the business goals, because if I focus on the user and I start collecting the data, I find that most of the business goals can be reached once the data is collected.
Absolutely. That is so spot on, and we will address that again when we get further into the discussion. But that is absolutely, we really can't emphasize that too much, Anders. Thank you. So back to that big picture, and as Anders pointed out, it's working with the users and understanding, part of this is understanding what they need, not just as the corporation or the division and the department. It's understanding what the user needs. And then, as Anders was saying, it's talk with them about their goals and understanding their problems. And that's part of the contingency planning. If they have problems, how do you provide a workaround? How do you identify what you can do in these different scenarios? And sometimes for myself, or one of my approaches is when I learn that they have an exception that happens less than 1% of the time. It's not necessarily appropriate to design the program itself, full features, to automatically accommodate that. If it's something that happens, when I say less than 1% for a small business, that may be something that happens every 2 or 3 months, maybe even less. Then those are things, a lot of times you need to have a flag that takes care, that alerts people to that, and then a process for handling it. But don't dedicate a disproportionate amount of funds and risk the program or schedule. So, but it's part of the big picture of getting that global need and then taking that down to every level that you are working with, especially to the end user. So, and this is where we're going to get into the project management techniques.
Can I add a comment to what you just said?
Absolutely.
Okay. So as you were saying about contingency plans, I think also a factor is that sometimes the cost of adding that feature up front isn't actually that high, even if it is just a 1% or edge case. But I find that the more of those edge case features I add, the more difficult I find it to add more relevant features at a later point, because oftentimes they're just interconnected, and the more code I have, the more difficult it gets to add new features because they interrupt or conflict with already existing features.
Excellent point. That is, you know, and I bet that floats around in a lot of us in the back of our minds when we're looking at things, but we don't articulate it. So that's really, thank you so much for bringing that right out to consciousness. And I'm not going to interrupt my presentation to make additional notes, but Anders said you're recording this, so hopefully that'll trigger me. I could write things on the side too, but anyway, no, that's excellent. So I hope the rest of you will share ideas also as we go through some of the project management techniques. And I'm not going to get into UI design. We don't have enough time for that. But when you're Anders, when you were talking about you have to get the user buy-in, that is fortunate from my perspective and from my clients. They have, I'm repeatedly and consistently just feel that I'm blessed. It is a gift that I have for understanding the end user and seeing things from whatever. Every client is a different industry, and creating intuitive designs that go way beyond what they even thought they needed. And for me, that's the exciting part for me. As like I said, I have the incredible benefit of hiring people that are my colleagues to do a lot of the development, which lets them focus on what they like. They love programming, you know, writing the code, and I am the solutions architect, so it's a wonderful thing. So project management. This is where we leverage Access, and it's we couldn't have a better program for rapid development. I mean, Access sets the bar. For me, I from day one of using Access decided I had to deploy in phases because I was self-taught and independent, never had a mentor, so I could do something, get my client using it, teach them how to use it, they'd be realizing the benefits, and then I could see they needed that opportunity to even have be cognizant of the potential. So it was a win-win and kind of a snowball. As I learned more of their business, because as a brand new beginner, it would be very egotistical of me to think I could know their business in a day and no Access in a couple of months. And I just started I had a client within a month of seeing Access. So that's, for me, Access is that rapid, that intuitive. And so I just can't say enough about it in that way. But deploy in phases. It lets us as a developer continue to learn what they need. It gives the client an early, very timely opportunity to adjust what they want. So if we have to revise our requirements or our structure, we do it right at the early on. So and we were talking, Anders, that goes right back, speaks back to your comment of sometimes when we try to do too much right at the beginning, we say, well, we'll adjust for this, and we'll get that little nuance handled, and all these things. we never deploy. And I know a lot of us that have heard nightmares from clients where developers before us have come in and the client has spent probably 10 times what we think the whole project should take, and they don't have anything yet. Because by the time they would get something big ready, everything they were integrating with, or their infrastructure or the network, was all changed. So it's scrapped. Deploy in phases. You get something out there, something working, you've got the buy-in, you get the users involved. And again, this kind of is where Anders was also saying that good enough is indeed good enough. That the Pareto principle also works here. There's a limit to perfection is not, I really had to learn this. Oh, it is so tough, and the same within writing a book. You cannot hold out for perfection. At some point, you gotta say, this is where we're gonna release, and we're gonna do the next one.
I think that goes very good in tune with what you were saying about deploying in phases. Sometimes you can think this is what the client wants, and you can spend hours getting it just perfect, then presenting it, and he's going to be, yeah, that's not exactly how I wanted it. So sometimes if you just get it good enough and go ahead and present it, you'll get feedback on that, and you won't have spent hours and hours trying to get it to your definition of perfect, because it might not be the same as what the client has.
Yep, and that's right here, this continuous reviews. And I think I mentioned that again in a subsequent slide, but the testing and revisions, when I say continuous reviews, it's right in my contract that the client is responsible for the preponderance of testing. Because no matter how much I try, cannot get in the user head. I can't think of every possible way they're going to move the burn cursor. And I tell you, they will find a way to do it. And, that totally, how did they do that? Why on earth would they do that? But that's part of it. Or I get, and at being blessed with working in a constant barrage of different industries, I have to just be humble and accept that their condition, this person is out on a production floor. This guy's in a construction zone. Another person is on a fishing vessel up, in Alaska. So, and those are rough waters. But designing something that works under each of the different environments, like Anders said, and thank you so much for chiming in, Anders, is thinking of the user. But that testing and the revisions, and then being able to get something out there, gosh, I have a couple of clients, I would never design what they want, except I've given them a file, and then they'll say, one lady is just epitomizes this. She sent me something back. Well, here's how we want it to look. Oh, my Lord. It's like Anders said about getting something just right, a form or report. The colors and layout, there is nothing that would have prepared me or given me a clue as to design what she wanted. Because I think of doing things where just a little bit muted and easy on the eye, but that was what that office wanted. So that's where we focus on the user and leverage what she was also the owner of the company, but one of the users. So anyway, So going back to our project management techniques, we have to take all of the information that we get about what they want and setting their goals. We've got our requirements documents. We're going to have some of that, and work that into how do we manage our schedules and budgets. And figure out what works for you and the client. And it's not just you, because it has to be communications with the client. So they may have their forms or practices for change management. You may have yours. You may have to both do some sort of management and munging the two styles. I try to limit the amount of time I devote to documenting change management, do it practical, have it in my contract that phone conversations followed up by an email are official change requests and documentation. So if I have, and I limit what items, to what degree I have to have documentation on changes. Now, depending on your project and the type of client you have, you might have to have everything documented down to the I's and T's. But having the documentation, if you do have issues with a budget, documentation of your changes will help you not only with the current project and payments, but also learn and improve your project management skills. So some of that's on us. Each of us has to be responsible for our own skill sets and some of our own training time. And if we teach ourselves a lesson, sometimes it's costly. I did a contract and trusted my counterpart, but they were not a U.S. and they were not governed by United States contract laws. So although we had lots of discussions and they said this is exactly what I want, when it came time to pay me, their contract, because they were not a U.S. entity, they didn't have to pay me. And U.S. contract law, because that's what I'm governed by, I have no recourse. That was an expensive lesson for me. So how that goes into project management is partly your contracts, and sadly we can't just trust handshakes. And revisions, you do need to know how much of it has to be officially documented, and are you working under work orders for what level of changes. But the part of the benefit in this documentation is it helps you quantify and explain the value add. Now, it's usually management levels that are signing the checks or authorizing the checks to be cut, funds to be released. It's the user level that we'll really have to focus on getting things right, because without their buy-in, the best project in the world can be stepped all over and killed. So this last bullet, it's always a trade-off. How fast? How many features? Or cost? And those are the three things that go into that equation. And we have to work with the client. Part of my way of containing costs and meeting a schedule is getting the client involved in the ongoing reviews, send them a screenshot of a form, do a quick online meeting, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, show them a process, ask them if this is what they were thinking about, anticipate report, reusing functionality we all do that. We have our toolbox. And making them responsible for testing, telling them, you realize they need to use it, and you'll do the changes based when they find an issue. I'd be delighted to have some, hear how other people, what techniques other people really find successful in the project management. The next discussion is going to go, we'll wrap up this project management area, and we just have a couple slides to talk about communication. And some of these go right back to the things we've discussed already, or that I've touched on. So I really think this is a time for, I encourage somebody else to share some of your experiences.
So does anyone have anything to add? I do believe you're able to unmute yourself if you have something to add.
And as some of you know, I can probably just keep on talking, but I appreciate no one was trying to interrupt and had muted your phones or mics rather than interrupting discussions and distorting the recording. But I really do hope to hear and allow people to share. But,
Well, if you go back a slide, I can add something.
Sure.
Oh, I think Ben has something to say.
Actually, this is Alan. Sure, I could add something.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, I work actually with project management at IT Impact, and one of the things that we've integrated into our management of our projects is I work very closely with our accounting department, and we're able together to work on managing on a daily basis with a spreadsheet to see each project and each developer or developers on each project, the totality of how much the proposal encompasses for the total project, and if there are different components, whether it's just Access or web application as well, or various parts, I can keep track much better because we have a lot of complex large projects these days that involve many developers, and so it's really hard to rein in that budget, especially the hourly cost of the developer's time. And we found that working very closely with the accounting department, I have a screenshot every single morning of how much time in total we have with each project, and each developer, how much time they've invested so far and how much time they have left, and that gives me a really good visual way ahead of time about how we're doing on each project, and I can stop and take a look and assess whether we are going to need more time. We can look at what we might need and approach the client to see if we lay out our arguments as to what percent completion we're at and how much time we might need and why, and basically prevent ourselves from going over budget and having an unhappy client.
And that is such a key thing. Thank you so much for sharing, Ellen, because
Sure.
It's like you said, the talking to your client, a timely identification of the issues, talking with the client. Boy, one of my rules with my contractor was do not let my manager, which in this case is our client, do not let my manager be surprised by bad news. I don't care how bad the situation is, you come to me, I will work to get it resolved. And in your area, you're doing exactly that. You've got the tools to track costs, which is the budget side, schedule, which is how are we progressing with features, and wow, all right, this one we hit a stumbling block and hurdles happen, and sometimes we can't even explain why. We're doing our absolute best, and it's mind-boggling that it isn't done. But it happens that way. And so that's regardless of whether we're doing a technology project, a construction project, or managing things on our own time. One of the benefits that they have with you managing this project management area is many of us, you have tools, phenomenal tools. Many of us are trying to be an all-in-one, as I'm an independent and I'm the solutions architect. So I have to learn from my own lessons. And that's part of where sharing this kind of information in these forums, we can help each other. And in also not just with the techniques, but understanding that this is it is the way that projects evolve. And we need to develop our own skills, and we need to learn. Even the people that you work with, Alan, the developers, they have to manage their time. They have to document what they're working on, but they also have to be good at managing their time so that they can produce cost-effective, quality development. That's what all of this project management is really focused on. How do we identify what needs to be done, put it in a time frame, get it on the schedule. We used to use Gantt charts. There's a wealth of project management tools and programs out there that can be used. We can also create our own. So awesome. Andrew, did you want to also share something? Hey, come back. There we go.
Yeah, I'll add something quick. I think a very good point you make here is about identifying changes that need to be made, but more so communicating those with your client. You want your client to see you as an honest person, not someone who's trying to cheat them, and you do that best by communicating in an open and honest way. A big issue with that is that most of my clients, they don't know anything at all about Access. So really sometimes you have to hit that balance of simplifying the technical terms to something they will understand, so you can explain it to them why this suddenly is more expensive than what you initially told them. And if you can do that right, I mean, usually they will understand and say, okay, well, fair enough, I do see that point. I had a very simple change request recently. A different department wanted to use a program I'd already developed for the client, and I was just really simple. Okay, I have to replace some drop-down lists. I figured that's not going to be a big issue. It's just new lists. I mean, how hard can it be? But suddenly I realized that the current department using it, they were all using abbreviations for their systems in the drop-down. So their longest piece of text was 5 characters long. And the new department, they didn't use abbreviations and didn't want to. And their longest piece of text was 30 characters long. So suddenly it wasn't just changing the drop-downs, it was changing the forms, it was changing the reports, it was changing the subforms, all those places where that drop-down was used or referenced, it had to be redesigned. So I had to go back and tell them it's not those 1 to 2 hours I initially thought it was going to be. It's going to be probably a day's work going through all those forms and rearranging it, because it's not just making the box wider, because now the box doesn't even fit where it's supposed to fit or where.
Right.
But I mean, they took it quite well when I explained it to them.
And a lot of times I think, and you did it very in a timely manner, right away, as soon as you found out the situation. Sometimes I do screenshots, and I do this a lot, is to teach my users I love Snippy, how to use Snippy and paste that into an email or a Word document and send me information. Similarly, in your case, Anders, as soon as you found out, it's a combination. Snippy won't get dropped down, so then you end up doing print screen or whatever cropping. But there's some things that this is just a sidebar, but it helps by having those visuals and the screenshots, and then sending that in a Word document and or email, so that you've got the documentation of what the issue was. And your other comment of communicating, our clients, a lot of them don't have any use of computers except for very dedicated programs. Like, it's almost like some of them are still dumb machines, or are converting to, whether it's still or that all they are is a box. Pizza boxes is what they were called years and years ago. It's a terminal, logs into a server, they have nothing. And all they know is the program that's in front of them. So we are in a situation where when I talk with a client and I'm trying to explain how come something I thought I was going to get done overnight is now I'm almost a week into it, and I'll find an analogy to something in their industry. One guy does custom elevator interiors. So I know darn well he understands change management from a production floor process, because these are custom orders, and when a client does a change, when one of his customers does a change, and he doesn't have the product in house, or the items in house, or they do a change but it doesn't fit with the type of system that they've already requested, then he's got a lot of retrofitting to do. So that's another way. Those are ways of helping to communicate and make sure that the client understands and sees you as their partner in this. So this is where we were with that, and what a great segue into communication skills. So this will wrap us up, and we'll be just barely on time. Communication skills, we know that the impact of communication, if we're in person, over the phone, over the internet, in writing, all four have dramatically different skill sets and impacts on the communication. Sometimes we need to, and written communications have devolved to such a standard that it's kind of mind-boggling. So people who have had to focus since I was in high school, written communications, or grade school, I think, were really critical. And then writing books, I became even more focused on making sure it was stated correctly. Now, and then you look at texting. Oh my Lord. I have no patience for that dadburn little phone. But we do have to understand the impact that our discussions or communications have on the recipient. Back to my client that does the custom elevator interiors. He uses, the only program otherwise that they had been using pretty much was Dadburn. Okay, forget it. It's just for manufacturing and the art and design work, 3D stuff. So everything, AutoCAD, everything was in all caps. So once we started working, and I only met this man one time in 2 years. I've seen him one time in 2 years, and that was over coffee few months into the project. And we're working, and all of the emails are in all caps. I think the man is shouting at me, and I can't figure out what the heavens I've done wrong. Finally, I told him, and he cracked up laughing, because that was the way they type everything, is all caps. So it never dawned on him that a certain style would be perceived as, sorry about that, guys, communicate frustration or anger or dissatisfaction. Our goal, we have to understand our client. Yes, it's partly their job to understand and work with us, but as the consultant, we have to go that extra mile, which is all of those things I was talking about earlier about that big picture, a shared goal. Stay focused on our purpose. We are goal-oriented. We are goal-oriented. We are partners in success. And yes, I specifically and intentionally repeated myself because we really cannot overemphasize that. Our communication skills, it is how we work with others, can make or break the project as much or more so than our technical skills. Because if we cannot communicate efficiently and effectively, we cannot get the needs correctly communicated, prioritized, and adjusted. So that it's anyway, and the mutual respect that comes right in with it. Here we go. So, and this timing goes right back to the details, the doing things in stages, the extra features to get it right. Sometimes it's going to get deferred to phase 2, to the next phase, or to a lower priority. That all of these things can be looked at in many ways. So I know communication skills, we covered that throughout the discussion on the big picture, the business goals, down to working with the absolute end user, getting their buy-in, finding out their pain points, all of that. That's part of understanding the requirements. And those are skills for gathering requirements. Anders touched on that a couple of times, and he's spot on with that. I know every developer has faced it. So does anyone have anything else that they'd like to chime in and share here?
A quick note. When it comes to the mutual respect and communication, I feel that we can gain a lot by teaching our client just a little bit about database design. There's a very simple rule saying that columns are expensive and rows are cheap. If you have to add a field to a table, it's expensive because we have to, not adding it to the table is not, but we have to add it to the form, which sometimes means having to redesign the form or move a lot of other stuff around. We have code that we need to update to include that extra field. But adding an extra row to a drop-down takes usually less than 10 seconds. And sometimes getting that across to your client, if they're interested in saving, letting them know that the things we need to get right in this phase is what fields we need. And if you want to add an extra something in the drop-down, that's not going to be an issue, but getting the fields right from the start is important to keeping the cost down.
Absolutely, good point. And one rule of thumb that, kind of a guideline I heard years ago, and if I don't, okay, is that approximately 1/3 of the project cost is requirements gathering and really understanding what you need. Requirements gathering and documentation. So that then you get into your development. Because if you get it right, if you understand, you can get your structure right. And Anders, that's what you're saying. We have to work with the client, really work with them during our requirements gathering. And part of that is the education back and working with them and giving them a safe environment to talk about things. And speaking of safe environment, this is one thing that I do with my clients, and it's kind of, apparently I am the anomaly, but when I'm ready to deploy, I tell them that their first, whether it's 2 weeks, months, whatever it is, those 10-minute calls to me, 15-minute call to me, there's no charge. Because I need them to feel safe in being able to pick up the phone and tell me, this isn't working.
That's a
I
very
need
good
them
point.
to pick up the phone and tell me right then that there's a problem, that they have a hiccup. And I need that notice immediately, because if they keep going, the cost of going back and trying to fix it later.
If they've been entering bad data for 2 weeks, it's going to be a disaster trying to fix it.
Exactly. So I tell them right up front, we've already done a lot of testing before we deploy, but if they find something within the first 2 weeks, I don't charge them for that 15-minute call or whatever it is to have me look at something with them, or tell them, oh no, if you do this, the way you're expected to do it is like this and this. So those, like I said, my understanding is I'm kind of the anomaly in that arena, but for me it helps a lot with the trust, the two-way communication, and the sense of partnership.
I think it's also a very good way to entice your client into getting started with the program, getting that buy-in, getting them to use them. If you're letting them know, hey, the first 2 weeks of bug fixing or calls are going to be free, there's a lot higher probability that they're going to install your program and distribute it to all the users straight away.
Yep, and I'm not saying that new features are not added free. We document those kinds of things, but I do, like as you were saying, Anders, I do put some parameters on that, and I'm pretty liberal as far as my clients. Most of them I have for life. Once they sign up with me, they're my client until they get so rich they retire. And that's pretty much all but one. That's been the way it's been. And the rest are still with me. So I'm happy about that.
This is Alan again. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on what you were just saying. I think it was really insightful and helpful for me, because I think we're always kind of wondering, in all of our projects, we've got clients who are kind of like, why, at what point do you cut off the bug fixing and actually start charging for it as outside of the original scope of the project, right? And it's always kind of a dilemma, I find, in how you explain that properly and how you don't upset a client who could be satisfied up to that point, and then after you deploy, say they don't use it right away, could be even a month that goes by before they really have some good time to test it, to maybe incorporate some kind of language actually in the original contract that, and then revisit that when you deploy to make sure they understand, okay, hey, we're here for you the first 2 weeks. Really try and use it. We can fix any major problems for you right away. And then, after that, then you have to start saying, okay, this is the limit and this is where you need to start, covering your costs again.
And that's a really good point, Alan, because see, you come from a different arena than mine. And if my clients, when we deploy, they are using it because I'm creating programs that are managing their entire business. And so we're real time, and so for me, it's a little bit different. They wouldn't really have an opportunity to not. But and so you might have a situation where they say, well, we're not going to be able to use it. Can we do an extension? And daggone it, I do that even back with Comcast and things. They shipped me a piece of equipment, and I told them I won't be there to work with it for a month. And it's from when I get to get it installed. That's when this kicks in. When I can start using it, that's when your 3 months of service kicks in. So those are things absolutely. I hope that there's some good wording, and like you said, by talking with your client about that up front, it really does build a lot of goodwill and avoid issues.
Absolutely.
The other thing, if you're in situations, just as a thought, if you're in situations where the client is actually not, you don't know whether or not they've deployed, and maybe you have a 2-week policy or maybe you have a 1 month, whatever it is, halfway through that, send out a friendly email saying, hey, we're halfway through that bug. We're halfway through your initial service and coverage time. We really would like to hear feedback on what your users are experiencing, their favorite features, couch things very nicely, ask for the very positive, and any challenges or anomalies that they've run across. So you're taking the very responsible project manager position of reaching out. That's on you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Sometimes I've had the experience of having a client telling me something is extremely urgent and they want it today, tomorrow, yesterday, and I spend it's not so much in databases, but other things I've done. So I fix up or write up this document and I send it to them, and I come in 2 weeks later and notice that it's sitting untouched on their desk. And I imagine something similar could happen sometimes for database projects. You write up the database, you send it off to them, they don't install it straight away, and maybe after a month they start, we're not really using this and it cost us a lot of money. And if that's their experience, even if it is their own fault, they might think that the database was a poor investment. There's a poor return of cost. And that's from the client side of it. And from our own side of it is that if they come back within 2 weeks with, say, a bug report, all of the code programming is still going to be fresh in mind. If I've just released something and I get a bug report, usually I almost instantly know where the problem is. But if it's been 2 months since I wrote that program, it's going to take me longer time to fix it.
Absolutely.
So quick bug reports are also a good way to reduce your own cost of bug fixing.
Yep, absolutely. There's so many techniques. I mean, and depending on the size of the deployment, the automated systems, and I have too many of my clients that I can't even log in. They can't do internet meetings because they're so locked down. So there's no prayer of automated, email to me or anything else for problem reports, but it's on-prem for any kind of work, or blindly talk them through.
That sounds scary.
That is torture, actually, for me. Blindly talking them through trying to diagnose something. But anyhow, those are all, war stories in the trenches, and we all have our own wonderful for discussions and sharing, collaborating, and learning techniques that other people use to solve that. I really want to thank everyone who has joined us today for sharing, and hopefully anybody who has more ideas to share or has questions for me, please send me an email, and you can ask Anders for the slides if you'd like them. I'm happy to share, and I encourage you and invite you to join in our Access Group meetings, which are the third Wednesday of every month, and we do online sessions as well. And in June, we will have Kathy Malone joining us. She's going to fly out and join us to do a presentation. She hasn't sent me the write-up yet, but I'd be happy to, anybody who would like, send me a note, and I can add you to the newsletter list for that.
Thank you very much for coming, Teresa. I think you did a great job. Some good insights here, good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to more participation.